Well, hey everyone, my name is Dylan Richardson, and I am doing an informative speech on coffee. How it's made, where it comes from, anything coffee. All this information can be found on the National Coffee Association's website, which is ncausa.org. Now, to get down into it, coffee starts off as a coffee tree seed. When planted, they let it grow for 3 to 4 years, and eventually they'll start to see a coffee cherry sprout from the tree. Um, as it's growing, it'll finally ripen, it'll turn into a deep red color. There, they will know that it's ready for harvesting. Fun fact, the coffee tree can grow to be 30 feet tall. Moving to the second step now, there's two methods to harvesting the coffee cherry. The first method is strip picked, and that is where the picker goes through with a machine or by hand and takes all the coffee cherries off the branches, whether they're ripe or not. And moving on to the next step, the next method for this step is selective picking. This is where the picker goes through and individually picks out all the good cherries, coffee cherries. In this process, they will switch off from trees 8 to 10 weeks apart from each other. And they do this to just make sure they get the best coffee cherries for their coffee. After this process is done, they then move to the third step, which is the processing and drying. In the processing and drying step, they have to go through and pick out all the bad coffee cherries, and they have to do this very quickly to prevent more coffee cherries from spoiling. After doing so, they take all the coffee and start the dry process, which is where they just lay out all the coffee cherries onto like a big field, and then they start raking them every so often and just let them dry out from the sunlight. In doing this, their goal moisture level for this coffee cherry is 11%. On the rainy times and in the evenings, they cover it with a tarp to prevent more moisture from getting into the coffee cherry. If they don't do the dry method, which the dry method is the most common way to do it, they would do the wet method. And the reason why the wet method isn't the most common way is because water sources are limited in most countries where coffee farming is done. In the wet method, though, they take all the coffee cherries and they dump them into a water tank, which is where they begin to ferment. In the fermentation process, they are able to remove the pulp of the cherries. They are able to remove some other layers in there that they don't want for the coffee cherry. After this process is done, the coffee cherry is kind of like a harder texture, and then they let it dry out. Just like in the dry process. And the reason for the wet process is to get rid of the extra layers that we don't want in our coffee cherries. After that, they move on to the milling and just the milling the coffee cherries part. In the milling of the coffee cherries, by this point, all of the coffee cherries should be like a harder texture. Some will have layers, some will not, but that's what the milling is for. In the milling process, they will run them through machines where they sort them by weight, size, color. They will also take off any of the silver skin, any of the pulp, or any of the other unwanted layers that we don't want on the coffee cherry. After they are milled and sorted, this will allow the coffee cherries to be shipped. Yeah. So the coffee cherries will be bagged and shipped in like a sackcloth, and they'll be sent over to a taste tester. The taste tester is the guy who will make sure and check the quality of all the coffee that's coming through. At this stage, it is now a green coffee, though. In this process, though, he will examine the size and the weight as well. He will then take the green coffee to a small roastery lab where he will roast the coffee and grind the coffee. From there, he will then take the coffee and infuse it into boiling water and perform what we call in the coffee industry a cupping. The process of a cupping is where you first waft the coffee smell after it's sat in there for a desired time, and then you will take a spoon and break the top layer of the coffee grounds on the coffee, and then you'll dip the spoon into the coffee and pick up a spoonful of coffee, and then they literally slurp the coffee, and then they'll let the coffee sit on their taste buds, and then they will spit it out. In this process, they were able to taste for any particular notes in the coffee, and they're also able to smell the aroma of the coffee. The reason for doing this, it allows us to grade the coffee and check the quality of the coffee. After that, the taste tester sends off the green coffee to any coffee shop roaster or any wholesale roaster, and they allow them to roast the coffee beans and sell it to us for wholesale or for homebrew, or allow us to buy it in the coffee shop. So yeah, some fun facts to know about coffee. Ounce to ounce, espresso is stronger than black coffee, but your normal 2-ounce espresso to an 8-ounce cup of coffee is going to be weaker because there is more caffeine in the black coffee. The darker the roast, the stronger the coffee is actually a false fact. It is not right. In fact, the light roast is going to be stronger because it is roasted for less times. And the reason why is whenever you roast it, the longer you roast it for, the more caffeine comes out. That is why decaf is there. Decaf does have caffeine. It's just roasted for a very, very long time. That all being said, guys, thank you, and I hope you guys have all the knowledge in the world on coffee now.